A big topic in Unit 3 is periods and sentences, and there's an analysis portion, an assignment, that asks you to look for periods and sentences in a whole bunch of different excerpts. And I've got those now, and we'll step through them. Periods have to do with closure. So the main thing about periods is looking for a PAC. If you're in a context where there are a lot of half cadences, it could be that even imperfect authentic cadences can do the job of bringing closure. So in that sense, it is kind of relative. But periods have to do with closure. Sentences do not have to do with that. They're more of a motivic pattern. They're a pattern that has to do with motives and durations. So if you've got a sentence, you'll have a motive. That motive restated, so you've got one unit, that unit of length again, and then what's called the continuation, which goes on for twice as long and provides you some amount of contrast to that motive. So if say you've got motive X, you could have X, X, Y for the continuation, but it could be X, X, X prime. In other words, it's pretty closely related to X, but it goes on longer. All right, so the two aspects are motive, motive, and then some degree of contrast, and then the durational pattern, which is unit, unit, and then twice that unit in length. So it really has nothing to do with what kind of closure you have there. Periods have everything to do with the kind of closure that you have going on at the end of it. You could have many phrases, you could have one phrase, and it can still be a period. The period just means that at the end you've got conclusion, you've got conclusive cadence, and that usually means, as I said, a PAC. And furthermore, every cadence before that strong cadence has to be weaker. If it's on a par with it, then you're going to have to make it into a couple periods. All right, so let's take a look at Christ the Lord is risen today, and look for those patterns of closure. This goes, Christ the Lord is risen today, hallelujah. There's our 1, scale degree 1 at the end, and it goes 5-1 in the bass. That's a cadential 6-4, resolving there. 7th comes in a little later, and there's our tonic. That's a PAC. That marks the end of something. Compare this cadence before. Yes, it came to a tonic. Again, there's a 6-4-5-3 going on up above, so that motion. But basically tonic, and you're coming from a 4 chord. So this is a plagal cadence. Plagal functioning 4 going to the tonic. Phrase. Now some people wouldn't even think of this as a cadence, and that's okay too, because it could be thought of as subphrase, combining to form one big phrase. No matter what perspective you take on it, you're going to need a big unit that spans that. If you think of this as phrase and phrase, and that's a period, that's fine. I'm going to also consider calling this one phrase, but at the same time a period. So no matter which way you look at it, this is a period. Why is it a period? It's because you've got the PAC here at the end. All right, let's think now about if you were thinking of this as a phrase 1 and a phrase 2 here, how do they relate to one another? Well, this melody is quite different than this, and we reflect that with labels that do that. So melodic labels are an important part of a phrase diagram, such as we'll be creating for each one of these. The other important thing is to write in the kind of cadence. Now I'm going to go ahead and write plagal here and consider that to be a phrase. This is a 2-phrase period. It's not one of the typical kinds that you find, because plagal cadences are pretty rare. So this, we can say it's a parallel period. Not a parallel period. We can say it's not a parallel period because we've got 2 different labels there. We need to say it's contrasting. Okay, it's a contrasting period, but it doesn't fit into one of the really typical 2-phrase period patterns that we're used to. That would be things like interrupted, continuous, sectional. Those are very typical types, and you can see those on a handout that I've provided for you. This does not fit into one of those. The main thing is it's a contrasting period. Is there sentence structure in here anywhere? Well, I don't hear this opening motive come back here. These are two different. I don't see it going on in here. If you don't have a motive that comes back, you can quit looking for sentence structure right away, because that immediately repeated motive is a prerequisite for the whole idea of a sentence. Okay, so we do have a period though, and we can label it as we did here. Next we get something, a little bit of the contour of this, but pretty different. Now here we have that same kind of sine feel to this chunk of melody. Let's go into a 5 here. 6, 4, 5, 3. Notice those are held over as a suspension. 2 suspensions, a double suspension, creating that 6/4. Okay, so here's our half cadence. If we even want to think of it as a cadence, I'm very flexible. You can do different things, and I'll take it. You can think of it as a subphrase, a portion of a larger phrase, or you can think of it as 2 phrases that combine to form a period. Now, why is it a period? Notice that this is the same music coming back here again. We've heard it in measures 3 and 4, and now we hear it in 7 and 8. So we had a PAC before, we're getting it again right there. Alright, so let me put my labels on that. You want your cadence labels, and you want your melodic labels. This is almost a prime, and I'm tempted to write that in there, but this is left up and this steps. So I'm going to give it a fresh label. That's A, that's B, this is going to be C. This is the same as B, so let's write that on there. Alright, so you're getting to see that as we do a phrase diagram, we're going to need a few different things. We're going to need a melodic label and a cadence in every case. We also, if I weren't writing it up above the staff, you'd want to give some sense of scale. How much music are we talking about? You could write 2 measures up above there. Or you could write measures 1 through 2. Something to, if it's far away from the music itself, from the score, we need to orient the person who's looking at this thing. Even if you take a step away from it and come back the next day, you want to be able to look at that diagram and say, well, where is that? Identify where it takes place, or give it a number of measures. One of those means will help to orient us within the score. All right, do we have any periods going on here? We said we've got 1. It's got 2 different melodies at play, so this is contrasting. Contrasting period. Now, does it fit into one of our patterns? Well, it is interrupted because it comes back to tonic right here. An interrupted period is one that goes to 5 and then gets back to a tonic for the second phrase and closes out. So this is a contrasting interrupted period. All right. I'm looking for cadences. Now this is not even a cadence. Look at how it approaches here. There's a suspension in there. See, that's held over. C is, we get B, D, F. Okay, so this is 7 getting to 1. That's no cadence. Way open-ended with scale degree 3 here. Now, if you compare this B material, this is the B material again. So I'm going to go ahead and call it B, but I'll do B prime to show that we're getting the B stuff, B melody back again. What's changed is that we've moved it up a 5th. Instead of being in the tonic, C major, it's in G. So this PAC that we know is now, you could do PAC/5 or PAC, but in 5 to show that it's in another key. Whenever a cadence happens in another key, make a note of it in one of these 2 ways. You see both quite a bit. in5 or slash. This is a new melody, so let's give it a fresh label. We've used through C, so let's go on to a D here. Now, these are subphrases if I don't have a cadence label here. And I'm not going to write one there because that's no cadence. So this is a phrase, and it's a period. Now notice that. Some textbooks make it sound like a period has to be 2 phrases, or that it has to have a certain number. But then you notice they go on to asymmetrical periods, and you realize that an asymmetrical period has 3 phrases in it. So they've got a 2-chord model, but they've stretched it now to 3, and when they do that, they'll say asymmetrical period. But the bottom line is, it's not just a 2-phrase unit. It could be 3. A double period has 4 phrases. What often gets overlooked in the whole scheme, though, is that you could have a 1-phrase period, because period just means it's closed. It's all the way done. Not like a half cadence, where it's closed, but it's, in a sense, still open-ended. We want a strong, conclusive cadence at the end of a period. And that's what's going on here. We've got that kind of closure. So yes, this is a period. Does it fit into one of our types? No, because this doesn't really cadence here. It's just a 1-phrase period, and if you want to make a note of it, that's fine. It does involve contrast. You could write contrasting, but the main thing is that it's a 1-phrase period, and I'll just leave it at that. Okay, now this is kind of like that first phrase, isn't it? We're moving from 4. See how close it is. This is the same. It ends the same. That's quite different. So we might want to do A prime just to show that it is related, at least in the ending. And then we'll have a plagal cadence at the end. So there's a phrase. Here's another phrase. PAC, the same one as occurred with B in the first place. So there's our PAC in the main key. With a plagal cadence and a PAC, we've got a weak cadence followed by a strong. That creates the period. So yes, we have a period. It's a 2-phrase period. It's contrasting. I didn't want to write contrasting in this one up here because we say contrasting when there are 2 phrases that contrast with one another. These are 2 subphrases that provide contrast. You could use it there, I suppose, but this is its normal meaning. 2 phrases, and they're very different in content. We don't have a label for it, just like we didn't have here in terms of harmonic scheme, because that plagal thing is so rare that it doesn't even get its own special label. So this is a contrasting period. The main thing is that we know that each one of these is a period because you've got a PAC marking it off, and the cadences that precede it, or don't precede it, there's no cadence here, are weaker than that last cadence. Okay, that's that first example. I'm going to move on in just a second to the next one.